Today's interior design industry is not the same as it was pre-pandemic. Very few are as tuned in with these changes as Kaitlin Petersen, Editor-in-Chief of Business of Home. In this episode, Gail Doby talks with Kaitlin about how the industry has changed and how designers should be speaking with clients in 2024. To hear about that, along with AI in the industry, defending your fee structure, and how Kaitlin has overcome her own imposter syndrome, listen to this week's episode.
So Kaitlin, I am so excited about this interview today. You were so kind to answer some personal questions, and I definitely want to talk about a few of those today because I think they're so fun. And they share a little bit about you because you are just the person behind everyone else's story, but you have your own story, and I love what you had to share. So let's start off with the first question that I asked you, which is talking about the biggest life lesson that you've experienced so far.
Mm-hmm. COVID, I think a lot of it for me stemmed from the pandemic. It changed our business in a lot of ways. One of them was that we went fully remote, but also that as everyone else in the industry was panicking, was not sure that their business was going to survive, I think they looked to what we were creating at Business of Home with a different intensity, and needed something different from us as a news organization. And I think in some ways I put that on as sort of what people needed from me as a person. And I moved through my job with like kind of wearing that like a coat for a couple years. And I really hit a wall probably early last year where it just felt like too much. I was so, I think Instagram diagnosed me basically with burnout, but yes. I got enough Instagram stories that were like, are you feeling this, this, and this? And I was like, yes. And so I started working with someone who's sort of part career coach, part therapist to really help me figure out what adjustments I needed to make, mostly kind of with my personal life and professional life to find a better sense of balance. And the toolkit she ended up giving me was to work through like what are 4 things that are the most important to you to experience in all facets of your life. And so I drew them almost like a double Venn diagram of, here are these 4 things. You could also do it like as a matrix, basically. And how far from the center are you in each one? They're not related. And I've shared mine before, but mine are connection, curiosity, openness, and meaningful work. And so each one of those quadrants means something really different to me. And it started to be a measurement that I've used to really check in with myself when I'm not feeling great, or when I feel overwhelmed, or when my to-do list didn't shrink today, or all I did was answer questions in Slack and I didn't move the needle in anything, or I didn't feel like I moved the needle, to be able to say like, well, do I feel like I made connections today? Like, no, like maybe I should phone a friend. Maybe I should call my grandma. Like maybe I need to find connection in a different way and sort of adjust that way. I think meaningful work is like kind of the easiest one because it's like, did I feel like the work I did today made a difference? No. And like find a really quick project that'll do that for you tonight before you close your laptop. And it's been a really great way to feel at least a little bit more in control, a little bit more centered. I think I'm the person sometimes who would get to that point of overwhelm and think like, well, I need to burn everything down and change everything. And this has really allowed me to focus on really small changes that can make me feel a little bit more, I won't say in control, but I guess centered, or like I'm moving through the world in a way that I want to be. It is not perfect, but it's a really good start. And it's been something I've been really grateful for, just to help me kind of find a better sense of fulfillment, I think, in the day-to-day.
Well, I can only imagine you're spending so much time getting to know everybody else. And this is a lot of work. And I think about your job. I've thought about your job for years, as long as I've known you. And I've thought about how do you keep up with that? How do you do all the things that you do because you're traveling, you're writing, you're editing, you're thinking about the vision for the magazine. You have a lot to work on.
I'm a terrible emailer. If you've ever emailed me and I didn't write back, like that is my absolute Achilles heel. I think for better or worse, it's sort of something I've accepted about myself. And then every once in a while, I'm like, no, that needs to be your self-improvement project. Like, bad communication shouldn't be the thing you accept. I feel really lucky that so much of the work does feel meaningful. The pieces of one of the things I had to give up pretty early as our team was growing was being sort of more in the mix on the news side. I'm not the person writing the breaking news story anymore, but there are incredible people on my team who do that better. And that's been really amazing to watch. The project that I've kept very kind of, let's say selfishly, but the project I've kept for myself is a series called the 50 States Project. I'm talking to a different designer every week about how they built their business. And I cry on half of those interviews. Like the person being interviewed might cry. It's a really moving, a meaningful connection. And I feel really lucky then to be sort of to shepherd those person's words through the editing process and onto the site. And so I think I've tried where I can to focus my effort and energy in the day-to-day on the things that really keep me centered on what the vision is, on where we need to be going, and that can kind of inform that bigger picture. The part where it's like running a media company and like digital clicks and analytics, like that's never going to be meaningful. And that's just part of the job. But I think finding a way even to find like the heart and soul in our Google Analytics is something I've definitely been working on.
Well, analytics aren't exactly the most exciting thing, but they are necessary to understand. Is anybody reading what you're writing? Right.
It's funny, it's not the data point that we use for anything, but one kind of digging around in there, I found the measurement of how many people come back to you more than 200 times in a year.
Wow.
And that to me actually gave me a sense of community, that there is a number that, that there is this kind of large, shockingly large to me, number of people who do want to see what we're doing 2/3 of the days of the year. Like that's actually moving and meaningful in its own way. And I don't know who all those people are personally, but to know that even that somehow felt, I find community and I find meaning in that too. So I think looking for that in every piece of the job has been really important to me.
It's so interesting that you talk about that and about how many times people come back to visit. You do have so many good articles, and I don't read all of your articles or all of the days, but I do as much as I can. And it's so fascinating to me. I'll read these stories about the 50 states, and I think about all the people that are in there and how different their business is in all of those states, because it's just a different microcosm of the economy. And it's been really interesting. We do hear from people that have found us through Business of Home too. And they'll occasionally tell us, oh, I saw this article, somebody mentioned you on there. And then I saw this that was, you were mentioned in Business of Home. So it has a huge impact, and it impacts all of us around you as well. So
thank you.
Yeah, it's really great. And I think that's one of the things that has made it so fun to work with you. And we've gotten to know you over the years and have developed a relationship with you. And I think what's so fun is that we're able to bring our different perspectives in and work together. And we'll talk a little bit about one of the projects we've been working on for the last couple of years. But I do want to still ask you a few more of your questions. It's so fun. So you said the biggest challenge that you've overcome is imposter syndrome. How could that be?
Well, it's twofold. I think I was in my late 20s when I got this job. That's pretty young to, have editor-in-chief in your email signature. And I think I felt like I had a lot to prove at the beginning. I also, I joined Business of Home was called Editor at Large at the time. Our business has changed a lot in the last 7 years. And I worked on just the magazine, which was really new for the first year. So I was working on a product that not that many people had seen, not that many people were familiar with. You know, you would walk into High Point Market and you'd say like, we're with BOH, and people would be like, what? It really was. They knew editor at large, but not the magazine, and so it felt very much like building something from the ground up in a lot of ways. And then when I had the opportunity to start working on the digital side as well a year later, we really focused our efforts on more kind of investigative journalism, more serious journalism. And that was a little bit of a, strengthening of the reporting team that we had at the time. And we wanted to do things like ask people why their company went out of business, or why they'd filed for bankruptcy, or why they had done a massive round of layoffs. And it wasn't normal yet. Nobody was really talking about a lot of those things in the industry. It was good news or no news for the most part. Mm-hmm. And we spent probably the first year and a half, that I would say, the number of people who'd say like, why would I talk to you about that, and hang up the phone was huge. Absolutely. Even just asking, okay, you sent us this press release about this new, vision for your showrooms. What's the strategy there? Well, it's in the press release. Like, no, it's not. It's just like who decorated it, and the features that it includes are in there. But why are you doing that? What does that mean for the industry? What does that mean for your business? Those were really uncomfortable questions when we started for a lot of people in the industry who had never been asked to go on the record about a lot of that stuff. And so I think sort of that combination of things, like being young, feeling like people didn't take you seriously, and really having kind of the driving force of like what you were trying to accomplish really questioned by the people you were interviewing on a pretty daily and weekly basis. I think it requires a lot of like belief in where you're going to kind of move through that. But I was definitely really worried for a really long time that it wasn't going to work, or that no one would respect what we were doing, or that I was not enough. I think COVID changed that in a lot of ways as well. There was sort of that outpouring of people saying, we need this. This is important. That was a really big part actually for me of getting over that hump of maybe not fully believing that I was going to have, what it took to make it a success.
That's so interesting that you share that. And I think every single one of us has imposter syndrome at some level or another. And Erin that works with me, and she's been with me, it'll be 19 years this summer. And she started as an intern in our company, in our design company. And so when we began this business 16 years ago, this week, it actually
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. It's a big milestone for us. And I think for her, she also felt that at the very beginning, and she's grown into this role where she's a co-founder of the company. And this is a big deal for somebody who's her age. And so when I look at how far she's come from where she started, she had to overcome so many things to feel confident in who she was. And now I see her stepping into the person that she is. And I think you just have to get your nose bloodied a little bit.
Totally.
For a better thing to say. But
when it's funny, I came from the role I had before Business of Home. I was at Hearst at, House Beautiful, Elle Decor, and Veranda, but I was there for a long time. And at some point, I think you are to a lot of your coworkers always the assistant who answered the phone and makes calendar appointments. And I think it does take maybe leaving to sometimes to shake that off. But I think it also took me, in a new job, like a couple of years to really stop. I think I was so worried that other people saw me that way, but maybe I also saw myself a little bit that way. And you really have to, I don't know, it takes a while to stop worrying about that. I think I worried for a long time about being taken seriously.
So interesting. Well, and then you shared about a do-over, and you have to tell this story because I think that's pretty interesting. I love that movie, Devil Wears Prada.
Mhm.
You said it was like a Devil Wears Prada-esque magazine job. Tell me about that.
So I moved to New York and got a job as the assistant to the international editors of Vanity Fair and Vogue.
Mm,
And it was a role where the two women I worked for, were really using their personal and professional connections to help international editions of Vanity Fair and Vogue connect with American film, fashion, like celebrities, basically,
mhm.
artists, photographers. And so if, German Vogue needed a philanthropist to go on the cover, they were tapping their celebrity friend photographer and they're the latest movie star doing a big philanthropic initiative, and they would interview that person. And, one of their best friends would be, a fashion person who would dress them for the shoot. And then, the photographer they were friends with would shoot it. And then it would be syndicated in every single international edition because they were all in different languages and no one would know. It was a really interesting media strategy. But it was a very challenging job for very challenging people. Um, I worked in their home, so I had no coworkers, and there was no one there to see how abusive, I think, verbally abusive that job was.
Wow.
Um, and I don't think anyone had been there for more than 3 weeks at a stretch for a while before I got there. I stayed for 6 months and then I quit. Um, I learned a lot. It was a great way to learn about New York. Um, like, oh my gosh, people move through the world like this and expect these things. And uh, it it has taken a very long time to be grateful for. I think my do-over was that was another place where, I think I went into the next several years of jobs um, like believing a lot of the terrible things they said to me about my work that I don't think were true. I think if I had been doing the best job on the planet, they still would have said all of those things to me. And that was just sort of the working environment that they had come up through in kind of the fashion and media world. Um, it was, I remember coming home from that job one time and my roommate was watching Devil Wears Prada. And I remember standing in the doorway of the living room watching it for a few minutes and just saying, like, I can't believe you think it's funny to watch a movie about about treating people this way, which was like, it was very triggering. um,
My gosh, yes.
but I don't know. It has actually been incredibly useful now to know that a certain corner of the world, certainly in New York, but also, in uh, wealthy people all over the world
Mm.
live in a world where you can call someone's assistant and ask them, like, what side do they sleep on? I want to send them flowers so that they are on their bedside table and they're the first thing that this person sees when they wake up. That was sometimes my job. The
Interesting.
level of sort of like high touch, customized, absurd asks actually is a really good insight into, in some ways, like what's possible. You could do it without being an awful person, but it was a good training ground for everything that came next.
Well, and backing up to where you were talking about asking the tough questions about
hmm
bankruptcies or why did you close your business? You
hmm
have to learn how to ask some very difficult questions in that role. So that probably aided you in what you're doing now.
I mean, even just to call and say, like, hi, like my boss doesn't like the seat you gave them at Fashion Week. If you don't move them right now, they're not coming. And then you and I both have a problem. I don't love moving through the world that way. And that was part of that job.
My
Um, but kind of mustering that, yeah, to believe in yourself is actually way harder than asking someone, like, no, seriously, like, why did your company, like file for bankruptcy? Like, what were the financial troubles you were experiencing? And what was your role in contributing to that along the way? What could you have done differently? Like, that's easier. So,
Wow. Well, that is a great question about what was your role in that. And I think that we all have to remember that we have roles and whatever the mistakes are that
mhm,
we experience.
yeah.
And it's not somebody else's fault. It's we have a contribution to it as well.
hmm
So I love that you're asking those tough questions. Yes. Well, you learned well.
Thank
So,
you.
yes, and I think well, let's talk a little bit about the industry now.
Mhm.
It's changed a lot since you've been there. How long have you been at Business of Home now?
It'll be 7 years, I think.
Okay. So in
Um,
7 years, that's a long time. You've been through
mhm.
COVID, you've been through elections, you've been through all the
Yeah.
different things. You've been through the
Mhm.
inflation, all of the
Yeah.
wars, you name it. So what has changed about the industry during that time?
I was actually going to say something kind of totally different, which is actually the clients are smarter. I feel
Yes.
like one of the things I've watched is designers navigate the client experience and have to adjust to how much knowledge their clients come to the table with at the beginning of a job and then throughout the course of the design project. Um, I think designers were really just starting to hit their stride on Instagram 7, 8 years ago. And now, clients come very well versed in Instagram with Pinterest, with House, with wherever they're going to understand design, whether that's aesthetics or how much they want to spend or um, how they think the project should go. I don't necessarily think clients are coming to the table like with all the right information, but they are certainly coming with information. And I think that transition to for designers of needing to show up differently and either educate or re-educate their clients or find a way to sort of undo like, oh, you pinned all this bland stuff on Pinterest. Like, let me help you understand why we can do better together. Even the redirection, I think, we're talking about what things cost, talking about, how the business is going to unfold, what that relationship is going to be. That re-education process, I think, has been one of the most important shifts that I've witnessed.
And one of the most complex ones because
I don't, yeah, yes.
I think that when I talk to our clients over time, they are seeing this big shift. And yes, you're right. They have misinformation
Mhm.
and they come to the table with expectations that they don't really talk about. They don't talk about what their true budget is and what their
Mhm.
limits are. And it's not enough for you to ask the question about what is your budget
Mhm.
anymore because most people don't know what it really costs to do the kind of work that designers do.
Mhm.
And they don't know necessarily all the pieces and parts that a designer would choose for a space and why it would cost what it costs. So I think that is still one of the things where it's probably the biggest challenge today that
Mhm.
designers experience. And I don't think we have better answers today.
It's funny. I don't either. One of the things I have watched sort of fall apart is confidence, I think, from designers in saying, well, that's the way it's always been done, or that's the way I saw it, that's the way I saw it done, so that's the way I do it. I think one of the things that is exciting to me is that more and more people, like, for example, when I ask them, like, well, how do you charge? Like, how have you approached billing for your work? I get a different answer every week. So, like, I don't know that I don't think my role is to land on the right way. It's more to aggregate the many ways. Um, but I find that more people know why they're billing, why they're billing the way they are now than maybe they did 4 or 5 years ago. I think more people are aware of how the deliverables they're giving to their client line up with the payments they're receiving. They understand how to talk about the value of the work they're doing relative to their fee structure. And I think that's the most exciting evolution in that is sort of that ability to talk about money in a way that tethers the way you value what your firm does with the way your firm is compensated for the work. I think that's a really nice outgrowth of this
Sure.
transition. But I
Mhm.
think, clients coming to the table with some visibility into like how it works is what it took to get there.
That's an interesting perspective. And I think that what you said earlier, we talked about imposter syndrome for
Mhm.
you. The designers also struggle with that imposter syndrome. And when a client comes to them or even a prospect and says, well, that I don't want to spend that, or that's too
Mhm.
much money, is really interesting how that triggers that negativity and that
Maybe
fear.
I should be charging less. Yeah.
Do I have that value? Can I really charge what I'm asking? And I was just amused the other day. One of our clients who's been with us about 3 years, took him a long time to join our community. And then he finally did. And he was sharing the story the other day about meeting with a client who was saying, you should be charging less. This is what I'm willing to pay you. And he looked at the man and said, no, this is what I'm charging you. And this is what it's going to cost to do the job. And the guy said, okay. So what it tells me is that that might be just a negotiating tactic. And that if they trigger your doubts about yourself and they trigger your imposter syndrome, you may not be willing to stand up for yourself and demand that value that you really deserve to have, because you have to make money at this business.
The number of people who have told me, there's some version of the same story that I've heard often, which is, I'll ask someone like, well, what finally made you raise your rates? And it's almost always a really amazing client who at the end of their project, not at the beginning, but at the end was like, I would have paid double what you charged me. You should raise your rate. Which is interesting. But I do think, for how lucky to have that client, I guess, who sees the value in what you've delivered and is like, no, raise that up. But I think it's interesting how often clients come in with the financial, with the advantage, the financial knowledge, the business acumen, all of those things to be successful enough to afford design. A lot of the times, they do have the upper hand in some of that negotiation.
Some of it, to me, is triggering the emotional insecurities of people. And I'll share a story from years ago, 10 years ago. I have a client that came to me at one of our events, and she and I were talking, and she said, I'm really struggling. I'm not making any money. She signed up for our program, and in one of our sessions, I said to her, okay, and I can use her name because she's actually told this story on a video on our website. And I said, Becky, you need to raise your rates. In fact, you should double your rates. And she looked at me and she said, well, how do I do that? And I said, you just do it. And you go to your clients and you have a meeting and you explain that you've been undercharging for years and you've not raised their rates. And that in order for you to be able to continue to provide wonderful design services and all of the service that you provide for those people, that this is a necessity for a business. So she said, okay, well, I'll do it. And so she went to the first one and they said yes. And it was fine. And these are all men that she was talking to. The second one, same thing happened. The third one, the guy looks at her and he said, you know what? How did you get yourself to do this? And she said, my business coach told me to do it. And he said, you know what? I need to raise my rates too. He said, good for you. And so three in a row. I love that story. And so all three of them said, absolutely, you deserve it. I'm happy to pay you that higher fee, which still at that time was probably, I don't know, not even $200. So to me, this is about learning how to find your self-confidence. And also just sometimes doing what's hard to do without really feeling confident, but you do it anyway. And then you develop the confidence afterwards.
Yes.
So
that 100% that.
It's so true. So yeah, oh my gosh, so many stories about that. Well, we've seen a lot of those changes, and I really love that you brought up that the clients are coming with information, but they're not coming with enough of the right information. And I think if we can find whatever that is, that missing piece that they don't have, that's when they start to turn around and understand the value that you bring as a designer. So you need to be able to talk to those things that the client does not quite understand. So it could be as simple as understanding the value of bespoke furniture and something that's customized for them versus going and buying restoration hardware. What is the difference between buying something that you like online or like at a retail store versus something that is made specifically for you. It's completely different kind of design. And I think it really takes a different mindset from the
Mhm.
clients.
I think so too.
So, I know that you've done this 50 state series, and I want to dive into that a little bit.
Mhm.
What inspired you to start that?
I was uh, driving across Iowa one December, um, and it's gray and it's flat and it's a not very inspiring drive. And I started playing a game with myself, like, how many designers do I know in Iowa? And I started picking more states. And I was thinking, I didn't get very far. And I was thinking a lot about how good design media is at talking to about the same 500 people. Um, there is, I think it has expanded some in the last, 5 years, but I think certainly then and even now, there is sort of this group of people who get featured again and again and again and again. Maybe they have a publicist, maybe they decorate for celebrities, maybe who knows. But it felt like a very closed circle. It felt like a very New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Texas, Chicago, Atlanta circle. Um, and it made me think a lot about all of the people I didn't know who weren't in my network, but also just that who weren't getting celebrated despite having probably really successful businesses. Um, I'm an editor. And so at some point on that drive, I realized that there are 50 states and 50 is pretty close to 52, which is a year-long package. And I was like, well, this is easy. I'll just do one a week and see what happens. And I'll get like 2 free weeks to screw up, right? Like over the course of the year. And so we launched it. It was really, I did it fast without a ton of thought. And the first 3 or 4 people I interviewed, it was literally Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, were so wonderful, so generous, and just shared really personal stories with me about, experiences both in the design world and in their personal lives that had really transformed their businesses. And so what I thought was going to be a series about, geographically what's unique about being a designer in Alabama, that was there. But the emails that we started getting back were, I thought that I was the only person who didn't understand this, who had this problem, who was struggling with this. And 3 people emailed me and literally just said, this made me feel so much less alone. And that stopped me in my tracks. That became kind of the focus to me of what that series is. I think the states still are a nice way to increase representation from, all over the country. There is sort of a sense of place that's important to celebrate there. But so much of it to me is about presenting a portrait of somebody, really in the thick of thinking about their business, assessing where they are today, where they've come from, where they want to go, and showcasing, the hard parts of creative entrepreneurship in addition to the successes. That's really important to me. And so that became sort of the focus of the 50 States Project series. And it's honestly kind of informed just about every single thing we've launched since then. The idea that creative entrepreneurship is really lonely, that, so many people are in sort of creative silos. They don't have anyone to talk to. They don't have a feedback loop to say like, no, this is normal, or this is a growing pain that you will grow out of, or like with a very simple tweak, you could get out of this negative cycle that you're in. Like all of that can be really out of reach. And if we can present a portrait of someone who's triumphed in one corner or another every week, hopefully it is sort of that spark of inspiration. Someone needs to get over a hurdle of their own.
That's so great. I love that. Well, it sounds like those are some of the special learnings that you're able to extract out of people. So you probably feel like Barbara Walters a little bit.
It's holding a lot of people's truths.
Sure.
It's really, I feel really lucky to do that part of my job and to be trusted with so many stories.
Well, let's take a turn to the future. Now we're talking about what's going to happen in the future. Let's look at your crystal ball. What do you think is going to happen? And maybe how AI might be a part of that.
I think that's funny. I think AI is the next thing to watch. I joke a lot that every single business challenge the industry is facing, on the retail and industry side, and also on the designer side, is really still tied to the industry's struggle to adjust to the internet. Like, I think so much of the challenges are, around pricing transparency, around billing transparency, around, clients having more information. It's really that, decades long business model disruption is sort of the root of so many challenges. I think AI is interesting because it's totally different, in the way that it is sort of poised to influence what comes next. I don't have a great crystal ball on AI. I use ChatGPT to like soften tricky emails, but I'm not a super user. I am encouraged by the fact that, it's certainly, AI can't replace execution. It can't replace client experience. It can't, I don't know, maybe there is a world where it can read floor plans and understand like how to make a complex, tile schedule. I don't know, but I think it's a really useful tool for inspiration. I think it levels the playing field for firms who can't afford to invest in really high quality renderings. Maybe you can use that visualization tool earlier in the process to get on the same page with your client, to start to generate images and say like, well, what does this feel like to you? What are you looking for in this? It's certainly the time investment in creating a mood board, in creating, a visual identity and inspiration board for a project. Does AI create a real shortcut to speaking the same language as your client? That seems interesting. And that seems like a really interesting possibility to me. I think brands like Wayfair are developing, shoppable AI room generator things. I think if you are, working on smaller projects that are $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000, you probably should be worried about that, because I think AI can do that job and give a client a shopping list in a few years at most. But I think if you are working in the luxury sector, there's a lot of upside for AI, and you're not really replaceable as a visionary, as someone doing the execution, as someone who sort of understands how to manage a job that's complex.
It's so complex, and it's so hard for people to believe how complex it is
Right.
until they actually do it. It's just
Mm-hmm.
amazing. I remember one of the first people that I worked with was a CPA, and he looked at my books and he said, "This is the hardest industry I think I've ever seen in my
Mm-hmm.
life." And every single CPA I ever worked with after that would tell me the same thing. And I
Totally.
don't just tell me that,
Right.
tell me how to deal with that. So, of course, that drove me to what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not all bad. So let's come back to the AI just for a
Mm-hmm.
second, because that's one of the things that we're going to focus on in the
Mm-hmm.
next survey that your company and ours and
Mm-hmm.
one of our partners, Interior Talent, we're doing together. And I'm really excited to bring this particular survey to the forefront, because we always ask about fees and salaries, but
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about AI. Let's talk about
Mm-hmm.
VR and some of the other things that are coming into our radar, and how you can, or how you're seeing it. Are you
Mm-hmm.
using it? Are you not using it?
Mm-hmm.
If you are, how are you using it? And how do you see it being used in the future? So I think
Mm-hmm.
all of us can have a little fun with a crystal ball. We don't know where it's.
100%.
Yeah.
There's also the really like unsexy part of AI, which is not the renderings, but which is a
Sure.
lot more of the like data generation.
Mhm.
And that is where I have a much less strong understanding of sort of what is possible. I know media companies are looking at how can you use AI to write metadata and like the stuff that no one sees, but that sort of underpins your website. I wonder what the opportunities for automation are in a design firm, kind of in that vein. Like, is someone going to write a program that does, I actually don't know what, but that sort of that, where is the really awful time-consuming data entry work that a computer could do for us, that where that is a value add. I think looking at opportunities for a program to sort of think for us and execute for us on the back end could also be really interesting. and
Mm.
is a value add. I don't, that is 100% me making stuff up, but it seems like there's an opportunity for something to grow in that space on the back end of a designer's business.
Hmm. And that's an interesting thought. So the software vendors that work on the accounting side of the business, if they could
Mhm.
figure out a way to enter proposal data without having to do it
Right.
manually, wouldn't that be awesome?
Right.
And
Again, I don't know how to do that. That's not my area of expertise, but I know that, there are AI models that are learning from, if you look at this data set, like here's what we want you to output, could it get smart enough that someone's double checking as opposed to manually entering that data?
sure. Well, I think that's an opportunity. And who knows, maybe the software companies are listening to
Right.
this podcast
They're like,
and
done.
this will be
But
something they
it's
introduce.
one of those funny things where I think we do talk about AI and it is, the splashy, like design me a room, and it does. But there's
Yeah.
also so much opportunity that's a lot less
Mhm.
glamorous, and that again isn't necessarily a threat to a design business and could be a real value add.
Mm. Yes, and I think that's where we all need to be focused on what could it do to make
Mhm.
life easier for design firms. So,
Right.
yes, you and I are on that same page. It'll be really fun as
Hmm.
we look at the questions and we start asking those deeper ones and figure out where can we go? Where can the
Hmm.
industry go with the help of this tool versus how is it going to take things away?
Right.
So I think we actually have more positive things that will come
Hmm.
from it than negative.
I do too.
So, how do you see small firms navigating the current challenges of the
Oh,
industry?
small firms, especially, I think it's the hardest. It's funny. I've seen a lot of people, and it makes me think of you every time I've heard this. But lately, I've heard a lot of people hiring not just senior staff first, but hiring only senior staff. Whenever someone says, "Oh, I decided to hire a senior designer first," I always think of you. I feel like that is such a I was like, oh, like Gail would agree. Um, but I've talked to a couple people lately who said, like, we want to stay small, we don't want to grow. And we found that the most sustainable way to do that is to not take on any junior employees at all,
Mhm.
to recruit only, senior level people, to have everybody, working at a very high level and to kind of resist the pressure to grow. So that was something I heard a couple times in a row lately that really surprised
Mm,
me. That felt it was new, and then I heard it a couple times, which I think is always interesting when that happens.
fascinating.
Um,
Hmm.
I think, gosh, small firms navigating. I feel like I talk to a lot of people who are, especially who have started their firm right before a ton of people started firms in like January 2020, which is wild to me. I don't know what was in the water. The number of people who are like, "Oh my gosh, can you believe it? I started in January 2020." And then like what was happening in the universe that everyone quit their job in December of 2019 and like embarked on design. But I think so many people in that space have hired one or two people, are sort of at the point where they took on too much work during the pandemic. They've kind of pared back to maybe a more manageable level. And I feel like I'm hearing a lot of stories of people finally getting like taking this time to get really serious about what they want their business to look like in the future, to build a more thoughtful infrastructure. So that, um, I know there's a lot of talk of like, is this a slowdown? Are things slowing down? I haven't heard enough to make me believe yet that it is a slowdown to the extent that it will put people out of business. It does feel like this moment is a slowdown that gives you time to like catch your breath and actually ask yourself why you're doing what you're doing and if there's a better way to do some of it. So, um, did that answer your question?
I think it did. And I think those are some great points to have made. I would love for us to end this interview with
Mhm.
maybe three things that the listeners can take away from the conversation today. And of course, we talked about a few things that maybe weren't expected, but maybe pick one personal and two business things.
I think from a business perspective, I think no matter how someone chooses to organize their business, I know I said I'm not the person to tell you like what system to choose or what methodology to go with, but I do think that being able to understand your why, and being able to communicate how your values and your billing and your processes align is the biggest secret to success that I've heard, kind of set regardless of what path you choose for all of those things. Actually, that might be my personal one also. Knowing your why has been really meaningful for me in my professional development, in finding fulfillment in my work, and in being able to focus my efforts on places where I can, shut the computer at the end of the day more full than depleted. But it took a while to figure out what that was and to be okay with letting go of some things that I liked to focus on the things that I loved. We didn't actually talk that much about hiring or team building, but I am so incredibly proud of the team of people that I work with. I think that knowing what's happening in the industry around you is one of the best ways to keep your business moving forward. And I just feel so grateful to work with an incredible team of reporters who are delivering business insights that this industry deserves. And so that is 100% like a plug for what I do at VOH, but it is also actually, I hope, wherever you get your news, a reminder to staying connected with how the industry is moving forward is, in my opinion, the best way to grow with the industry instead of suddenly looking up and finding out that you're incredibly far behind or out of step.
Well, I think that is a perfect end to the interview. And I thank you so much, Kaitlin, for being here.
Thank you.
And
it's been a delight.
Oh, it's so much fun. And I look forward to our next survey. Be sure to watch for that in the show notes. We will have a link for that so that you'll be able to take the survey. And we'll have the data out later this year. And we'll be having events at High Point Market as usual.
The survey actually really dovetails with staying abreast of the industry to me also. I feel like just maybe we didn't celebrate that partnership enough, but I think it does a lot of the same things in terms of giving you the data set to really like measure yourself against and understand where your business is strong, where it might need to catch up. I think that is, in that same vein as knowing what's happening in the news, knowing the health of your business relative to industry businesses all over the country is incredibly powerful. And it's amazing to collaborate with you and be able to share that with the industry.
Well, it's our give back to the industry. I've been around the industry for really since I graduated from college the first time. And so over these decades that I've been doing this, it's one of those opportunities to know a little bit better what we can do as business owners to be more profitable, run a better business, have a better life. All of those things come from knowing the data.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Thanks, Kaitlin, for joining Gail on the podcast and sharing your thoughts. Gail is writing articles for Business of Home. To read those, click on the corresponding link in our show notes or go to businessofhome.com/articles/authored_by/Gail-Dobie. Our 2024 Interior Design Industry Survey is available to take now. Lend your voice to this survey and secure your free copy when the results are available. To take the survey, visit theprolcollective.com/takethesurvey.